My grandson left me stranded at the airport for 6 hours. I wandered lost, confused, and frightened. Later, his scholarship disappeared. What I did made him drop out. I stood at gate 47, watching planes take off into the January sky, my phone dead, my heart medication running low, and the terrible realization settling in like ice water in my veins. Tyler wasn't coming back for me. 6 hours. That's how long I waited at Denver International Airport, wandering between terminals like a ghost, my 72-year-old legs trembling from the effort, my war injury from Vietnam sending sharp pains through my hip with every step. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight in my chest when I finally understood that my grandson, the boy I'd raised since he was 7, had abandoned me. My name is Robert Chen, and this is the story of how one act of betrayal at an airport changed everything. How it cost my grandson his scholarship, his education, and nearly his soul, and how I orchestrated it all to save him from becoming someone his dead parents would never recognize. The morning had started with such promise. Tyler had seemed almost like his old self when he picked me up at 5:30 in the morning, the Colorado sun still sleeping behind the mountains. He'd even brought me coffee, black with 1 sugar, just how I liked it, and for a moment sitting in his car, I could pretend we were back to the days when he'd drive me to my VA appointments, chattering about his engineering classes, his eyes bright with the same curiosity that had made his father such a brilliant mechanic before the accident took him and Sarah from us. Tyler was 22 now, in his senior year at the University of Colorado Boulder, a full scholarship student majoring in aerospace engineering, and I'd been so proud, so damn proud that despite everything we'd been through, he was going to make it. The trip to Florida was supposed to be a celebration of sorts, visiting my brother James, who Tyler hadn't seen in 3 years, a chance to reconnect as a family before Tyler's graduation in May. I'd saved for months for the tickets, working extra consulting jobs despite my age, reviewing engineering blueprints with eyes that needed stronger prescriptions every year. But it was worth it to give Tyler this gift, this time together before he launched into his adult life. But I should have seen the signs. The way Tyler kept checking his phone during the drive, the slight impatience in his voice when I asked him to help me with the self-check-in kiosk, the way he kept mentioning Sophia, his girlfriend from the wealthy Morrison family, and how her father was hosting some important networking event that evening. Sophia had been a dark cloud over our relationship for the past 8 months, filling Tyler's head with ideas about boundaries and toxic family dynamics and other psychological terms she'd learned in her philosophy classes, words that seemed designed to create distance between Tyler and anyone who'd known him before he'd entered her glittering world of country clubs and trust funds. I'd watched my grandson transform under her influence, trading his secondhand clothes for designer brands he couldn't afford, adopting a way of speaking that erased all traces of the boy who used to build model airplanes with me in the garage, who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during war documentaries, trusting me to keep the nightmares away just as I'd done since the night the police came to tell us about the accident. Tyler walked me to security, and I remember thinking how tall he'd gotten, how much he looked like his father, David, with those same strong shoulders and that slightly crooked smile that appeared when he was nervous. He helped me take off my shoes, held my arm as I walked through the metal detector, even carried my bag to the gate. "I just need to run back to the car," he said, checking his phone again.
"I think I left my charger."
"I'll be right back, Grandpa. Don't board without me, okay?" He squeezed my shoulder and I believed him. Why wouldn't I? This was Tyler, my Tyler, the boy who'd clung to me at his parents' funeral, who'd promised through his tears that we'd always have each other. I watched him walk away, his stride confident, and settled into one of those uncomfortable airport chairs to wait. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. I tried calling him, but my ancient flip phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it the night before, too excited about the trip to remember such mundane things. I asked a young woman if I could borrow her phone, fumbling with the smartphone, struggling to remember Tyler's new number. He'd changed it recently, something about too many spam calls. 2 hours in, the panic started to set in. The gate agent called for boarding, and I explained that my grandson would be right back, that he'd just gone to get something from the car. She smiled sympathetically but said I'd need to board soon or miss the flight. I waited until the last possible moment, watching the door close, the plane pull away from the gate, taking with it our tickets, our plans, our time together. The airport, which had seemed manageable with Tyler beside me, transformed into a maze of confusion. The signs blurred together, the announcements overhead merged into meaningless noise, and I found myself lost in what I later learned was the wrong terminal entirely. My hip was screaming by then. The old shrapnel wound from the Tet Offensive in 1968 flaring up the way it always did under stress. I'd never told Tyler the full story of that injury, how I'd dragged 2 wounded Marines to safety while metal fragments tore through my own body, how I'd spent 6 months in a military hospital learning to walk again. There were many things I'd never told Tyler, thinking I was protecting him from the harsh realities of the world, not realizing that my silence had left him unprepared for his own battles. By hour 3, I was sitting on the floor near baggage claim, my legs unable to carry me further. A janitor found me there, this decorated veteran who'd survived jungle warfare reduced to a confused old man lost in an airport. He called security, and a young officer named James, who turned out to be a Marine himself, immediately recognized the signs of distress in a fellow veteran. "Semper Fi, sir," he said quietly, helping me to my feet with a gentleness that made my eyes burn with unshed tears. "Let's get you sorted out." He drove me home in his personal vehicle after his shift ended, refusing to let me take a taxi, and during that drive, I learned that Tyler had told a staff member I'd already left with another family member. The security footage, which James would later send me on a USB drive, showed Tyler walking away from the airport without a backward glance, his phone pressed to his ear, laughing at something Sophia was saying on FaceTime. The timestamp showed he'd left exactly 12 minutes after depositing me at the gate. When James helped me to my front door that evening, I found an envelope tucked underneath, the University of Colorado Boulder logo prominent in the corner. It was addressed to Tyler, but after what had happened, I felt no guilt sliding my weathered finger under the seal. The letter was from the scholarship committee, requesting additional documentation regarding Tyler's application from 4 years ago. They were investigating discrepancies in family financial information that could result in scholarship revocation and repayment of $180,000 in funds already dispersed. My hands shook as I read, not from my developing Parkinson's, though I'd noticed the tremors starting months ago, but from a rage so pure it reminded me of the clarity that comes in combat when everything unnecessary falls away and only survival matters. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table surrounded by photos of Tyler's parents, of Mary, my late wife who died when Tyler was 12, and began to think with the strategic mind that had once planned operations in the Vietnamese jungle. The next morning, I climbed the pull-down stairs to the attic, ignoring the protest from my hip, and found Tyler's old laptop among boxes of his childhood things. Report cards I'd proudly saved, science fair trophies we'd won together, photos of him in his Little League uniform. The password was what I expected, 05151915, the date his parents died. Inside, I found a carefully constructed fiction that Tyler had built to secure his scholarship. He'd portrayed me as a disabled veteran unable to work, living solely on VA benefits, barely scraping by. He'd forged my signature on financial documents, created fake bank statements showing we had nothing, written essays about our crushing poverty, and his determination to lift us out of it through education. The irony was so bitter I actually laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet attic. Tyler had no idea about the patents I held for military equipment improvements I'd designed during my years as a consultant, innovations that had been generating royalties for 20 years. He didn't know about the $200,000 I'd saved specifically for his education, money I never touched because he'd insisted his scholarship covered everything, because he was too proud to burden me with any costs. Amy's message continued with screenshots of family group texts that made my blood run cold. The Walkers were actively planning to break the old man, discussing strategies to force me to sign over the house for the baby's future, celebrating when Marcus agreed to cut me off, calling me a controlling dinosaur who needed to learn his place. In one particularly cruel message, Stephanie's mother had written, "Once we get David out of the picture completely, Marcus will have no choice but to rely on us. We'll be the only grandparents that matter." Amy revealed that her parents had been living beyond their means for years, that they were facing bankruptcy, and they saw Marcus's success and my resources as their ticket to financial security. They had been planning this for months, maybe even years, grooming Stephanie to see me as the enemy, to interpret every gesture of kindness as manipulation, every offer of help as control. I called my brother Thomas that night, a retired judge who lived 3 states away, but who had always been my voice of reason when emotions ran too high for clear thinking. I told him everything from the birth announcement ban to the invoice to Amy's revelations, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice careful and measured the way it used to be when he was on the bench. "David, you need to protect yourself. This isn't just about hurt feelings or family drama anymore. These people are trying to financially and emotionally abuse you, and they're using your son and granddaughter as weapons. You need to document everything, you need to secure your assets, and you need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better." He gave me the name of a private investigator he trusted, told me to get my important documents secured, and said something that stuck with me. "Sometimes, David, the most loving thing you can do is establish boundaries so firm that people have no choice but to respect them or lose you entirely." That night, I couldn't sleep, so I went through all my important papers, and that's when I discovered something I had almost forgotten about in my grief and shock. When Margaret had died, her life insurance and the inheritance from her parents had gone into a trust, with me as the executor, specifically designated for the education and well-being of future grandchildren, but with an important clause that Margaret had insisted on. The beneficiaries must maintain loving family relationships to access the funds. The trust, which I had managed carefully and invested wisely, was now worth $2.8 million. It was money I had planned to surprise Marcus with when Emma turned 1, a gift from the grandmother she would never meet to secure her future. But now, reading the clause Margaret had insisted on, I realized she had been wiser than I knew. She had somehow anticipated that money could corrupt family bonds and had built in this protection. I also found the deed to Marcus's house, and there, in the fine print I had forgotten about, was a reversal clause my lawyer had insisted on adding years ago. If family harmony is deliberately destroyed, or if the property is used in a manner detrimental to family unity, ownership would revert to me with 60 days' notice. At the time, I had thought it was unnecessary, just legal overcaution, but now I saw it as a lifeline, not for revenge, but for justice. My hands were steady now, my mind clear in a way it hadn't been since receiving that first text. I wasn't angry anymore, or rather my anger had transformed into something more useful: determination. I would not be a victim in this story. I would not let them reduce me to nothing more than a checkbook. I would protect myself, and in doing so, maybe, just maybe, I would protect Emma from growing up in a family that had lost its way. The next morning I began making calls. First to my attorney, explaining the situation and asking him to review all my legal options. Then to my accountant, ensuring all my finances were secure and documented. Finally to the private investigator Thomas had recommended, because I needed to know if there was more to this story than even Amy knew. Within a week, the investigator had uncovered a pattern that made everything crystal clear. The Walkers had done this before with their older son, Kevin, who had cut them off completely 5 years ago after they tried to force him to mortgage his home for one of their investment opportunities that turned out to be a scheme to fund their lifestyle. They had been grooming Stephanie since Kevin's defection, making her their new meal ticket, and when she married Marcus, a successful doctor with a wealthy father, they must have thought they had hit the jackpot. 2 weeks after receiving the invoice, I put my plan into action. I sent Marcus a response via certified mail, ensuring both he and Stephanie would have to sign for it, and I copied her parents on everything. Inside was a check for $32,000 with "Payment in full, final family transaction," written clearly in the memo line. Along with the check was a formal letter, drafted by my attorney but written in my voice that would change everything. "Dear Marcus," it began, "I am honoring your invoice as requested. This payment releases me from all grandfather obligations, as you have already released me from grandfather privileges. Enclosed, please find the following: Notice of property reversal for 42 Maple Drive, effective in 60 days per clause 7.3 of the deed. Notification that the Margaret Chen Memorial Trust for Grandchildren is being dissolved, and the funds donated to the Children's Hospital where your mother was treated, as the trust requires maintaining loving family relationships which you have formally severed. A complete accounting of all financial support provided to you over 28 years, totaling $847,000, all marked gift No repayment expected, to be clear that I have never, until now, been transactional with my love. And finally, this photograph of your mother holding you as a baby, with her handwritten note on the back. Family is everything. Never forget that. I didn't mention in the letter what the private investigator had discovered about the Walkers' bankruptcy filing, or their son Kevin's restraining order against them, or the fact that they had already been making inquiries about the value of Marcus's house with real estate agents. I didn't mention that I had already had my attorney draft cease and desist letters and prepared restraining orders if they escalated. I didn't need to. The facts I presented were enough. Within hours of the certified mail being delivered, my phone began ringing nonstop. I didn't answer. The voicemails piled up, and when I finally listened to them that evening, they told a story of escalating panic. Marcus's first message was pure anger. "You can't do this. That's our home. Emma's home." The second was disbelief. "Dad, this is insane. You're really going to throw your granddaughter out on the street?" By the fifth message, the anger had turned to panic. "The Walkers are saying they'll sue you, but Stephanie is freaking out. Please call me back." And by the 10th, desperation. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. We need to talk. Please." Stephanie's parents left their own messages threatening legal action, calling me a monster, saying I was destroying a young family out of spite. But Janet, my lawyer neighbor, had already sent them their own certified letter with copies of their text messages about breaking the old man and documentation of their conspiracy to commit fraud, making it clear that any legal action from them would result in immediate criminal charges. They went silent after that, but I knew they were regrouping, probably working on Marcus and Stephanie, trying to maintain their control. I maintained my silence for 3 days, letting the reality of the situation sink in for everyone involved. I wasn't being cruel, I was being strategic. They needed to understand that actions have consequences, that you cannot treat family like an ATM machine and expect the cash to keep flowing. On the morning of the 4th day, at 6 a.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing there, unshaven, disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite him in, just stood there in my doorway waiting. "Dad," he began, his voice cracking, "Emma needs stability. You can't throw us out. Whatever issues we have, she's innocent in all this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion, the fear, but also, underneath it, the entitlement that had been fostered by his in-laws. "I'm not throwing anyone out," I said calmly, my voice steady though my heart was racing. "I'm accepting the terms you set. According to your invoice, I'm not Emma's grandfather, I'm just a bill payer. And bills, as you taught me, have limits. You can't ban me from my granddaughter's life and then demand I fund it. That's not how family works, Marcus. That's how business works, and you're the one who made this a business transaction." He broke down then, right there on my doorstep, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since he was 15 and Margaret was dying. "They made me do it," he said through his tears. "The Walkers, they said if I didn't cut you off, if I didn't get money from you, Stephanie would divorce me and take Emma. They're living with us, Dad. They control everything. They threaten to say I'm an unfit father if I don't do what they want. I don't know how it got this bad. I just wanted to make Stephanie happy. And then her parents got involved, and suddenly you were the enemy, and I couldn't think straight anymore. Part of me wanted to pull him into my arms, to comfort him like I had when he was small, but I held firm. You're a grown man, Marcus. A doctor, a father. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your choices. You chose them over me. Now you need to live with that choice, at least until you're ready to make different ones." He left that morning without resolution, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. The recognition that he had been manipulated, but also that he had allowed it to happen. That evening, Amy messaged me again with an update. The Walkers were in full panic mode, trying to convince Stephanie that they should sue me, take the house, take everything they could. But Stephanie, according to Amy, was starting to crack. The reality that they might lose their home, that Emma might grow up without stability, was breaking through the fog of manipulation. Amy also told me something that changed my perspective. Stephanie had been crying for days, not just about the house, but about what she had done, what she had let her parents convince her to do. She keeps looking at Emma, Amy wrote, and saying she doesn't want her daughter to grow up in a family full of hate. She's starting to see what our parents really are. A week passed with no contact, and I used that time to prepare. I consulted with a family therapist about the best way to handle potential reconciliation, because despite everything, I still hoped we could find our way back to being a family. I also met with my financial advisor to restructure my assets, ensuring that regardless of what happened, Emma would be provided for, even if it had to be through a trust that bypassed her parents entirely until she was an adult. I cleaned out the room next to mine, not as a nursery but as a potential safe space because something told me this story wasn't over. I was right. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, exactly 20 days before the eviction deadline, my doorbell rang again. This time, when I looked through the peephole, I saw Stephanie standing there, holding baby Emma alone, tears streaming down her face. I opened the door immediately and she practically collapsed into my entryway, exhausted and shaking. "They went too far," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "My parents, they tried to forge your signature on property transfer documents. Marcus caught them. He threw them out, but now they're threatening to call CPS, saying we're unfit parents, saying they'll take Emma." Without thinking, I reached for the baby, and Stephanie handed her to me without hesitation. Emma was so small, so perfect, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine with that instinctive baby grip that pierces straight through your heart. She looked like Marcus had as a baby, but I could see Margaret in her too, in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth. I led Stephanie to the living room, still holding Emma, and made her sit down while I prepared tea one-handed, unwilling to let go of my granddaughter now that I finally had her in my arms. "Tell me everything," I said gently, and she did. The whole story poured out. How her parents had moved in supposedly to help with the baby but had taken over everything. How they had convinced her that I was trying to control Marcus through money. How they had twisted every story Marcus told about his childhood to make me sound like a tyrant instead of a loving father. When Marcus told them about the time you sold your cars for his medical school, they said you were just trying to make him dependent on you, to guilt him forever. When he mentioned how you stayed close after Margaret died instead of taking that job in London, they said you were suffocating him, not letting him grow up. They poisoned everything, Mr. Chen. Every memory, every kindness. They turned it into something ugly. She told me about the forged documents, how her father had practiced my signature for days, how they had planned to file the transfer while Marcus was at work and present it as a done deal. But Marcus had come home early because Emma was sick, and he had caught them in his home office with the documents and a notary who was in on the scheme. The explosion had been volcanic. Marcus had physically thrown them out, threatening to call the police, and they had retaliated with threats about CPS, about custody, about destroying Marcus's medical career with false allegations. "He's in the car," Stephanie said quietly. "Marcus, he's too ashamed to come in. He thinks you'll never forgive him. He thinks he's lost you forever, just like he's lost them. We have no one, Mr. Chen. We destroyed the only real family we had for people who were just using us." I stood up, still holding Emma, and walked to the window. I could see Marcus's car in my driveway, could make out his silhouette hunched over the steering wheel. "Watch your daughter," I told Stephanie, handing Emma back to her, and I walked outside into the cool night air. I approached the car slowly and knocked on the window. Marcus looked up, his face ravaged by tears and exhaustion, and rolled down the window. "Come inside, son," I said simply. "Your daughter needs her father and your wife needs her husband. We'll figure this out together." The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to see. He got out of the car and stood there uncertain, like he didn't know if he was allowed to hug me. I made the decision for him, pulling him into my arms the way I had when he was small and scared. "I'm sorry, Dad," he sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I let them turn me against you. I betrayed you. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said honestly. "But Emma deserves a family that can heal. Margaret would never forgive me if I let pride keep her granddaughter from knowing love. Come inside. We have a lot to talk about." We stayed up all night, the three of us, with Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms, talking through everything. Marcus admitted things that were hard to hear, how he had been jealous of my success, how he had felt like a failure compared to me despite his achievements, how the Walkers had exploited those insecurities to drive a wedge between us. Stephanie talked about growing up with parents who saw their children as investments rather than people to love, how she had been programmed from childhood to see every relationship as transactional. "When I met Marcus," she said, And then I saw real love for the first time. It scared me. I didn't know how to trust it. So when my parents said it was all manipulation, it was easier to believe that than to believe I was worthy of being loved without conditions. We talked about practical matters too. The Walkers were now completely cut off, with restraining orders being filed and CPS being notified about their threats with documentation of their attempted fraud. The house would remain in my name for now, but with a new understanding that it was the family home, not a weapon or a tool of control. The trust fund would be reinstated but restructured, with Marcus and Stephanie as co-trustees alongside me, requiring unanimous decisions for any distributions, ensuring it would truly be for Emma's benefit. We would start family therapy, all of us, to work through the damage that had been done and learn how to be a healthy family. And most importantly, we would establish new traditions, starting with weekly dinners, something Margaret had always insisted on. "Families that eat together heal together," I quoted my late wife, and we all cried. The next months were not easy. The Walkers tried everything to regain control, from love bombing to threats to actual legal action. But each attempt only strengthened Marcus and Stephanie's resolve to break free. The restraining orders held, and when they violated them by showing up at the house, they were arrested. Eventually, they moved out of state to live with some distant relatives, still sending occasional poisonous emails that went straight to our lawyer. Meanwhile, our little family began to rebuild. The weekly dinners became sacred time. No phones, no distractions, just conversation and connection. Marcus started sharing stories about his mother that he had kept bottled up since her death. And I told him stories about their early marriage that made him see me not just as his father, but as a man who had loved and lost and survived. Stephanie blossomed without her parents' toxic influence, becoming the daughter-in-law Margaret would have adored. She asked me to teach her Margaret's recipes, and we spent Sunday afternoons in the kitchen while Marcus played with Emma, the house filling with the smells of Margaret's famous pot roast and apple pie. She started calling me Dad, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence, and each time she did, it healed another small wound in my heart. Emma became the bridge that connected us all, her innocent joy and simple needs reminding us what really mattered. When she took her first steps in my living room, reaching from Marcus to me with complete trust that we would both catch her, I saw Margaret in her smile and knew that somehow we had found our way back from the brink. The therapy sessions were revealing and sometimes painful. We uncovered patterns that went back generations, cycles of manipulation and control that had been passed down like toxic heirlooms. Marcus learned to recognize how his need for approval had made him vulnerable to manipulation. Stephanie discovered the difference between boundaries and walls, learning to protect herself without shutting out love. And I confronted my own fears about being overbearing, realizing that in trying so hard not to be controlling, I had sometimes failed to be present when they needed guidance. Our therapist helped us develop new communication strategies, ways to express needs and concerns without triggering old wounds. And slowly, session by session, we became not just a family again, but a stronger one than we had been before. 6 months after that terrible night when Stephanie showed up at my door with Emma, we celebrated the baby's first birthday. The party was held at the house that had almost torn us apart, but was now truly a home again. Marcus and I had spent weeks restoring Margaret's garden for the occasion, planting new roses alongside the ones she had planted years ago, a symbol of new growth from old roots. While we worked, we found a time capsule we had buried when Marcus was 7, and inside was a letter from young Marcus to his future self that read, "I hope I'm just like Dad when I grow up. He's the best dad ever." We both cried, holding each other among the roses, finally understanding that the love had always been there. It had just been buried under fear and manipulation and misunderstanding. The birthday party was small but perfect. Amy came, having become a regular part of our lives, the sister Stephanie had always needed and the aunt Emma deserved. Janet, my neighbor, was there too. No longer needed as a lawyer, but welcomed as a friend who had stood by us during the worst of times. We had invited Kevin, Stephanie's brother, and while he couldn't make it, he sent a video message welcoming Emma to the Survivors Club and telling Stephanie how proud he was of her for breaking free. As I watched Emma smash her first birthday cake with gleeful abandon, covered in frosting and laughing, I thought about the invoice that had started this journey. Marcus had had it framed and hung in the hallway, not as a source of shame but as a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything that mattered. During the party, Amy stood to give a toast, raising her glass of apple juice. She was newly pregnant and had asked me to be the honorary grandfather to her child, too. To family, she said, her voice clear and strong. Not the family that demands payment or controls through guilt, but the family that pays in love, forgiveness, and second chances. To David, who showed us that real strength isn't in never falling, but in always getting back up. To Marcus and Stephanie, who had the courage to choose love over fear. And to Emma, who will grow up knowing that she is loved unconditionally, surrounded by people who fought to give her the family she deserves. We all raised our glasses. Even Emma had her sippy cup, and in that moment, I felt Margaret's presence so strongly it took my breath away. After the party, when the guests had gone and Emma was asleep in her crib, the same one I had restored in my garage all those months ago, now properly in her nursery, Marcus handed me an envelope. "Don't open it until you get home," he said, hugging me tightly. When I did open it later that night, sitting in my study surrounded by photos of our rebuilt family, I found a letter that made me cry harder than I had since Margaret's death. "Dad," it began, "Stephanie and I want to make something official. Would you consider being Emma's legal guardian if anything happens to us? Not because of money or houses or trusts, but because you're the father and grandfather we want her to always have. You showed us that love isn't about control or conditions. It's about showing up even when people push you away, about maintaining dignity in the face of cruelty, about knowing when to stand firm and when to open your arms. That $32,000 check you sent, we never cashed it. It's in Emma's baby book as a reminder of how close we came to losing what really matters. We love you, Dad." Marcus, P.S. Mom would be so proud of the man you've become, not the man you've always been, but the man who emerged from this trial. You didn't just survive losing her. You've thrived in honoring her memory. I sat there holding that letter, thinking about the journey we had taken from that horrible day in the cemetery, when I received the message banning me from Emma's life to this moment of complete reconciliation and even deeper love. The Walkers had tried to destroy our family for their own gain, and they had almost succeeded. But in the end, their greed and manipulation had only served to reveal the true strength of our bonds. Marcus and Stephanie had learned to recognize toxic influence and resist it. I had learned that sometimes protecting yourself is the first step to protecting others. And Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, would grow up in a family that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more aware, more intentional in our love for each other. A year later, as I write this story, Emma calls me Papa and reaches for me whenever she sees me. She has Margaret's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin and a laugh that fills every room she's in. Marcus and Stephanie are expecting their second child, a boy they plan to name Thomas after my brother, who gave me the strength to stand firm when everything was falling apart. The Walkers have disappeared from our lives entirely, their last attempt at contact blocked by legal barriers and emotional boundaries that will never again be crossed. Kevin has visited twice, slowly rebuilding his relationship with Stephanie, and he told me privately that what I did, standing up to them, gave him validation that he had made the right choice years ago. The house on Maple Drive is filled with life and laughter again, the walls holding new memories that overlay the painful ones. I've learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or financial support, though all of those things can be part of it. Family is about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It's about recognizing that love without boundaries can become enabling, but boundaries without love become walls. It's about understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but rather remembering and choosing to move forward anyway. The invoice that Marcus sent me, that shocking, horrible document that felt like the end of everything, turned out to be the beginning of something better. It forced us all to confront the dysfunction that had been building for years, to cut out the cancer of manipulation and greed that was poisoning our family from within. Margaret used to say that gardens need both sunshine and rain to grow, but sometimes they also need pruning, cutting away the dead parts so the healthy parts can flourish. Our family had been overgrown with toxic influences, tangled in manipulation and misunderstanding, but that painful pruning period, as brutal as it was, allowed us to grow back stronger. When I hold Emma now, when I see Marcus teaching her to walk in the same garden where he learned, when Stephanie calls me Dad and means it with her whole heart, I know that Margaret would be proud, not just of what we've become, but of the journey we took to get here. The pain was real. The betrayal was devastating, but the love, The real love that survived it all, that was worth fighting for. Sometimes Marcus and I talk about that period, usually late at night after family dinners when the women have gone to bed, and we're sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the stars. "I almost lost you," he'll say, and I can still hear the pain in his voice. "We almost lost each other," I correct him, because it's important that he understands it wasn't just his failure. I had failed too, in my own way, by not seeing the signs earlier, by not being more present when the Walkers first started their manipulation. But that's what grace is, isn't it? It's looking at the failures, acknowledging them, and choosing to build something better on the foundation of what remains. Our foundation, it turned out, was stronger than any of us knew. It had been laid by Margaret, built with years of real love and sacrifice, and while it had been covered by debris, it had never been destroyed. The trust fund that had almost been dissolved is now carefully managed for Emma and her future sibling. But more importantly, we've established a different kind of trust, the kind that can't be measured in dollars or documented in legal papers. It's the trust that Marcus has my number on speed dial, not for emergencies, but just to chat about his day. It's the trust that Stephanie has me babysit Emma whenever they need a break, knowing that I'll honor their parenting choices while adding my own grandparently spoiling. It's the trust that when conflicts arise, and they do because we're human, we address them directly, honestly, with the understanding that we're all on the same side. We've learned to recognize the signs of manipulation, the red flags of toxic influence, and we've built an immunity to them that will protect Emma and her sibling from ever experiencing what we went through. I think about the man I was before this all happened, comfortable but perhaps a bit complacent, assuming that the love in our family was strong enough to withstand anything without active maintenance. I was wrong. Love, like gardens, like health, like anything worth having, requires constant care, attention, and sometimes fierce protection. The invoice that seemed like the end of my relationship with my son became the catalyst for its transformation into something deeper, more honest, more resilient. We don't take each other for granted anymore. Every dinner, every hug, every "I love you" is intentional, meaningful, chosen. When Emma runs to me with her arms outstretched, calling "Papa, Papa," I don't just see my granddaughter. I see redemption, second chances, the victory of love over greed. The frame holding that invoice hangs in our hallway, and visitors often ask about it, confused by why we would display something so painful. Marcus usually answers, telling them it's our family's reminder that even the worst moments can become turning points if you have the courage to face them. But I see it differently. To me, it's proof that Margaret was right when she used to say that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day, especially on the days when it would be easier to choose otherwise. That invoice represented the day my son chose otherwise, but it also marked the beginning of his journey back to choosing love. And that journey, with all its pain and revelations and ultimate triumph, has made us all better people, better family, better equipped to pass on to Emma and her sibling not just financial security, but emotional wisdom. As I finish writing this story, Emma is napping in the next room, and I can hear her soft breathing through the baby monitor Stephanie insisted I have, even though I told her my hearing was just fine. Marcus is at work, saving lives with the same hands that once signed that cruel invoice but now text me dad jokes during his breaks. Stephanie is in the kitchen, making Margaret's apple pie from the recipe card I gave her, the one with Margaret's handwriting and little notes in the margins. The house is peaceful, filled with the kind of contentment that only comes after surviving a storm together. We were tested, all of us, tested by greed and manipulation and our own weaknesses, and we almost failed. But almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as my father used to say. In family and love, in the things that really matter. Almost failing but then choosing to fight for each other, that's not failure at all. That's victory. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that remind me of the sunset Margaret and I watched on our last anniversary before she got sick. She told me then that her only wish was for Marcus to have a happy family, to know the kind of love we had shared. It took a while, and the path was nothing like what either of us could have imagined. But that wish has come true. Emma will grow up surrounded by love, the kind that's been tested and proven, the kind that knows its own worth because it's had to fight for its existence. And someday, when she's old enough, we'll tell her the story of how her family almost fell apart, but chose to come together instead. How an invoice meant to divide us became the document that ultimately united us. How her papa stood firm not out of stubbornness but out of love. And how her parents found the courage to choose family over fear. But for now, she sleeps peacefully, unaware of the drama that preceded her, knowing only that she is loved, that Papa will always catch her when she falls, that Daddy and Mommy are there whenever she needs them, that Aunt Amy brings the best toys, and that somewhere, somehow, a grandmother she'll never meet is watching over her with pride. This is our story, messy and painful and ultimately beautiful, a testament to the fact that families can survive betrayal, manipulation and greed if there's real love at the core, if there are people willing to fight for that love, and if everyone involved can find the courage to choose forgiveness over bitterness, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. The invoice that should have ended everything instead began everything. And for that unexpected gift disguised as cruelty, I am, strange as it sounds, grateful. If you've made it this far in our story, you've witnessed our journey from betrayal to redemption, from a family torn apart by greed to one united by love that's been tested and proven true. Maybe you've faced similar challenges in your own family, dealt with toxic influences trying to destroy the bonds that matter most, or struggled to find the balance between boundaries and love. Whatever brought you here, I hope our story reminds you that it's never too late to fight for the relationships that matter, that sometimes the worst moments can become the catalyst for the best transformations, and that real love, the kind that survives tests like ours, is worth every bit of pain it takes to preserve it. Please take a moment to like this story if it touched your heart. Share it with someone who might need to hear that families can heal from even the deepest wounds. And comment below with your own experiences or where you're watching from. Your stories, your struggles and triumphs, they matter too. And sharing them helps all of us remember that we're not alone in fighting for the families we deserve. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, redemption, and the incredible power of love to overcome even the greatest obstacles. Thank you for being part of our journey,